All right, perfect. We got the highest vacuum by adjusting those screws. We're set to go. What's up guys, my name is Andy, and in this video we're going to adjust the idle mixture screws on my Edelbrock carburetor. I recently installed this, and so now it's time to start dialing it in and getting it set up for the car that I have. Let's go over the tools that we're going to use. All we're going to need is a screwdriver and a vacuum gauge. I got this at Harbor Freight. I paid $15 for it. You can get these at any auto parts store. You don't need any fancy one. Something simple like this will work. Of course, everybody has a flathead screwdriver. So real quick, let's go over the various screws that we're going to mess with here as we get this thing dialed in. All right, you guys probably saw a recent video where I installed this carburetor. Well, now it's time to start adjusting the idle mixture screws, and then we'll also adjust the idle screw over here. There's a fast idle screw down below, but we don't need to worry about that for this video. If you guys have a vacuum advanced distributor, you're going to likely have a vacuum line hooked up here to this port. So this is the port that we're going to use. This is the manifold vacuum port, and we're going to hook up our vacuum gauge to that. And what we're going to look for is the best lean condition. And by doing that, we're going to start by screwing these in all the way, both of these idle screws, and then we'll back them up about 1.5 turns to kind of start at an even point. And then what we're going to do is we're going to watch the vacuum gauge, and as we adjust each individual screw, we're going to watch the needle on the vacuum gauge, and we want the highest vacuum. Number on the vacuum gauge doesn't matter. We just want the highest vacuum. And as we screw this in, it will create a leaner condition, and if we screw it out, it'll create a richer condition. And we're trying to find just the highest vacuum condition. We're not really worried about, well, you can't add any power in this scenario, because this is just for idling. This has nothing to do with when you're on the throttle and you're driving the car. This is just as it's sitting there. So fuel economy doesn't really matter. However, we don't want it to be any richer than it needs to be. We also want to do this with the air filter on if you can. Some people have larger air filters that take up a lot more space, and it's harder to get to these screws. I happen to have the smaller one here, so this works out. We're going to leave this on. Now we want to get the car warmed up and get it happy, and then we can start adjusting these screws. So let's do that first. Real quick, I've got an extra tack that I'm going to just hook up inside the engine bay here and just let it sit in here so I can watch the RPMs. If you're doing this by yourself, you're going to have to go back and forth. If you have a tack in the car, you can go back and forth, and you're trying to, keep the RPM at whatever, in my case, I'm looking for about 800 RPM. I don't know what you guys have set on your car, but for mine, I'm going to be looking for 800. And by having this in the engine bay, it just makes it easier as I'm adjusting this stuff. I don't have to go back and forth. But I do have a tack in the car. We're just going to use this just for this point here. All right, here we go. We got the vacuum gauge. You can see that it's sitting at, well, actually, really, the number doesn't matter on this one. But what we need to do first is I need to dial in, I got my tack, here. I need to dial in the RPM first. And the first thing I'm going to do is kind of slow this engine down. I'm going to get to about 800 RPMs is what I'm looking for. All right, so there we go. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to drive in each one of these screws, and we're going to back them out to 1.5 turns. Drive them in. Oh, killed the motor. I'm just going to go ahead and just dial these in and then back them out 1.5 turns just for a place to start. So half, 1.5, half, 1.5. Okay, now we can start the car. We're going to go back and adjust the idle and get this up to 800 RPMs. Okay, now we're looking at the gauge here, and I'm going to start with one side and go in first, and we're going to watch this needle go up. As we act out a half a turn. Okay, another half turn. And actually another half turn starting to go down. So we want to drive it back in to where the needle actually goes up. Okay, starting to move a little bit. Okay. Get a little bit more. Okay, now we're starting to go down. Okay, so now we do the other side. We're actually going to drive it in because we ended up driving this one in, so let's drive this one in first, see what happens. A little more. We're kind of topping out there. Okay, so now we want to look at our RPM, and my RPM is a little high, so I'm going to drop it down a little bit. All right, we're sitting about 800 RPMs. Now we can fine tune this, and I see how the gauge you probably noticed that this gauge dropped as we dropped the RPM. That's okay. So if we adjust these any more, nope, too much. Okay, so backing out a little bit, getting a little bit more vacuum. And we're not getting any more. Okay, so we can stop there. Back this one out a little bit, get a little richer. Yeah, we're not going anywhere with that, so we can put that one back. Okay, and the RPMs are up again a little bit, so we're going to drop those down. All right, and I think that's it. Let's see if I can get anything else out of this. Now, as we move it out, it's not changing, so we can just leave it where it was. Now that's going down, so back where it was. All right, that's it. Now we got the highest vacuum. Idle set where we want. These are set where we want. Now we can just set it and forget it. All right, guys, that's it. That's how you adjust the idle mixture screws on your Edelbrock carburetor. Holley might be a little bit different, but the concept is the same. And so real quick, I wanted to point out, sometimes depending on the condition of your carb, you may need to back the screws out or back them in. In this case, because it's a new carb, the screws actually went in. We started with 1.5 turns out. The final, setting on this, the extra screw was actually farther in to find that sweet spot where we get the highest vacuum and to get the RPMs where we want. So that's okay. Sometimes you need to go out, sometimes you need to go in, depending on your carburetor. Also, as you change the parts that have to do with the breathing of the car, you may find that you need to adjust the idle mixture screws. For example, I've got some new headers coming up pretty soon, and when I get those in there, I may find that the breathing of the car is just a little bit different, so I can go back and redo these idle mixture screws and just fine tune them. But once you do this, you don't really need to do anything. Again, this doesn't add any power to the car when you're on the throttle, when you're driving around. It's just when it's sitting there idling, or just trying to find the best lean setting so that we get this thing idle and happy. All right, guys, that takes care of that. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, and if you subscribe, I appreciate it because it helps my channel out, and we'll see you in the next one.